Tonight we're going to hear from representatives of some groups who caretake water resources and watersheds in the Clark Fork Basin. But just before I introduce them, I want to acknowledge the contribution of the Clark Fork Coalition, which is celebrating its 25 years of watershed caretaking this year. And they have a big River Fest on October 2nd. And I'm even wearing my River Fest t-shirt, but this is a different one. So all the information about that is on this poster. If you want to look at that, it's going to be a lot of fun. We have, as I said, some panelists tonight who are going to tell you a bit about the watershed group that they work with, maybe the mission statement, maybe describe one project or something, and then a bit about what their jobs are like and what they feel best prepared them for their jobs, because we're trying to show students career opportunities and how to get ready for career opportunities in this class as well. So maybe I'll ask them to come on up to the table here. Well, first I was going to say that Brian McDonald of the Blackfoot Challenge had hoped to be here tonight, but he came down with a cold. So you can find out about the Blackfoot Challenge's mission and projects by just Googling Blackfoot Challenge. So we're going to have Megan Burzell from the Clearwater Resource Council. Come and hop up here on the table. Renee Myers from the Water Restoration Coalition, the Upper Clark Fork. Wendy Sturgis from the Lolo Creek. And Dave Schultz, who is chairman of the board of the Bitterroot Water Forum. Is going to hop up there as well. And what I thought I'd do is just go ahead and run through everybody's little short bio really quickly, and then after that just have you take turns. I know that Renee brought a presentation that she's going to do, but the others may just be intending to do, talk. So first, Megan Burzell here has worked as the first thing I was going to ask was, how many of you are alums of U of M? Okay. And Brian, who came down with a cold, is an alum of U of M too. So there is life after U of M. So Megan Burzell has worked as a watershed coordinator with the Clearwater Resource Council in Seeley Lake for just over 2 years. She has a BS in Recreation Management from U of M and an MS in Forestry from Northern Arizona University. So take note how to get prepared for that job from an education standpoint. Then Renee Myers has been the project manager and executive director of the Watershed Restoration Coalition for the Upper Clark Fork for the past 2 years. She's worked for the Forest Service and the Montana Department of Natural Resources and Conservation as a hydrologist, soil scientist, and fisheries specialist. And she has experience in watershed management, natural resource conservation, stream restoration, and project and grant management, a very important part of this job, I know. Wendy Sturgis, explaining how she got to be this way, started out by saying that she spent many hours in a swamp as a child. But they did let her out of a swamp long enough to get an undergrad degree in environmental communications from Rutgers. She worked with New York PIRG and also with Montpurg after she came here. She got a graduate degree, Master's of Science in Environmental Studies here at U of M with an emphasis in environmental education. And she's worked on a lot of campaigns like the Bottle Bill campaign. She's worked for the Clark Fork Coalition. She co-founded the Watershed Education Network, was a facilitator for Project WET, has worked with the Montana Natural History Center, taught community watershed education at UM. You don't seem to stay on any one job for very long here.
I'm old.
Oh, she's older than she looks. Coordinator for Hazardous Waste Days for the Missoula Water Quality District and is now coordinator for the Lolo Watershed Group. Dave Schultz from the Bitterroot Water Forum has worked with the Forest Service in Oregon, Washington, Arizona, and New Mexico. He knows how to pick some pretty places to live. He now works part-time as a consultant for tribal governments and other government agencies and private companies, helping them engage citizens and communities constructively. His roots are in small towns and family farms and ranches. He grew up on a dairy farm and worked on a Montana cattle ranch for several years. He has BS and MS degrees in civil engineering from the University of Wisconsin, my alma mater, with a water resource emphasis. and he and his wife Christine live just south of Hamilton. And I got from him the job description that they have written. They need to hire a new watershed coordinator down there for the Bitterroot, and I sent that job description out to you guys. So what I was going to do is just maybe we'll just run down the row here, letting each of you guys, if 10 minutes, no problem. When you start running toward 15 minutes, I'll start going like this. So turn it over here to Megan. And hopefully those things are on and working.
It isn't. Yeah, you might not need to know.
Maybe use your mouth about
This is a little retro. As Vicki said, my name is Megan Brazell, and I work with the Clearwater Resource Council in Seeley Lake. Our mission is to initiate and coordinate efforts that will enhance, conserve, and protect the Clearwater River region for present and future generations. That is also verbatim the mission of the Blackfoot Challenge, just substitute Blackfoot River for Clearwater. We are similar organizations in what we aim to do, but have different approaches based on different characteristics of the land. The Blackfoot has large landowners, a lot of ranching, and the Clearwater is small landowners and a lot of logging. So CRC was formed in 2003 by 7 people who got together and decided that there needed to be some coordination regarding the natural resources in the valley. And they worked as a volunteer board until I think 2006, and they hired a part-time executive director who was around for about a year. And then there was a break between her and then when I started in May of 2008, I was fresh out of grad school. So I'm definitely the least experienced up here, and probably the closest to you guys in this room. I'm the only employee of CRC, so my title is meaningless. I do everything. I set up a retirement account, health insurance benefits. I run projects. I manage grants and contracts. I write grants. I spend a lot of time writing grants. What else do I do? Pretty much anything that you can think of. That's what I do, and I get to be involved in a lot of different projects, all the projects that we do, obviously, but we're limited in the capacity and not able to engage as deeply in all the things that we'd like to. One of the things that we have spent a lot of time on over the past year or so is, I'll try and explain it succinctly, but essentially we just received, well, for the Forest Service, we just got the Forest Service $1 million for restoration, implementation, and monitoring in the Swan Valley, Clearwater Valley, and Blackfoot Valley. That is the first year of what is supposed to be a 10-year program, and we have the opportunity of investing up to $90 million on the landscape over the next 10 years. So, I don't know, what are you, it's a, it's swcrown.com. Or mine or the Clearwater. crcmt.org. There you go. So anyway, this effort is a big collaborative effort that started last fall. It was the result of a bill that passed as part of the Omnibus Public Lands Bill in 2009. The bill was called the Forest Landscape Restoration Act, and the program that came out of it was the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program, which is a mouthful. We call it CFLRP. And essentially what this program wants to do is identify 10 priority landscapes across the country to invest money in restoration, build a restoration economy, create jobs in the woods, improve the watersheds that they're working in, and do it at a landscape scale. So a large group of interested people got together to form the Southwestern Crown Collaborative, refers to the Southwestern Crown of the continent. Participants include the Blackfoot Challenge, Swan Ecosystem Center, Northwest Connections, CRC, the Wilderness Society, the Nature Conservancy, the Trust for Public Land, Forest Service, obviously, DNRC, BLM. I'm sure I'm missing some people, but pretty broad. There are, national conservation groups, local community conservation groups. We also have Pyramid Mountain Lumber, who's the local lumber mill in Sealy Lake. They're heavily engaged. So really broad group of people that came together and developed a proposal for this funding, and we found out in August that we got it, which is great, but it means that we have a lot of work to do. I was intimately involved in the development of that proposal and will be intimately involved in the implementation of it and coordinating getting that done on the ground. I don't have numbers with me specifically for how much we plan to do, but the landscape covers 1.5 million acres, and we have identified like the wildland urban interface within that, and are planning through this project to treat fuels and restore forest in at least 80% of the wildland urban interface, which would be a pretty huge chunk on top of more water-focused restoration efforts like replacing, upgrading culverts, bridges, obliterating roads, storing roads, things like that, habitat improvements and that sort of thing. So that's one of the most exciting things that I've been working on. And I mentioned earlier that, I got this job straight out of school. I had a friend actually sent me the position description, and he knew the chair of the board, who's now my boss. And so I had that in, but, just submitted a resume and cover letter. I actually didn't get an interview the first time around because I had no experience, right? All I'd done is be in school. But then I guess they had trouble filling the position, and so they called me back, said that they'd like to interview me, and I interviewed, and I got the job, and 2 years later, here I am. So the process can work. It helps to know someone. But I would also say that I know it's frustrating when you're looking for a job out of school, and everyone's like, oh, well, but you don't have any experience. And I think that it's really important to recognize that, school is experience. I spend 80% of my day writing, and what do I do in school? I wrote a thesis, wrote papers, and that's hugely important. That $90 million proposal that we wrote, I got to write that. It wasn't my brain. I was taking information from a lot of people a lot smarter than me, but condensing that, putting it into the document that we ultimately submitted. I write grants every day, and it's important that you're able to communicate effectively with the written word, especially in a technological age where the phone is used less and email is used more. It's important to be able to communicate professionally in those mediums. So in terms of needed skills, I needed a master's degree in order to get a job. Unfortunately, that seems to be the way things are going these days, and I wouldn't have even been considered for my job if I didn't have a master's degree. And as I mentioned, the writing has been tremendously important for me to be able to perform in that level. But everything else, I learned on the job. I showed up for my first day. They didn't have an office for me, which I wasn't expecting, so I found out that I got to work from home. They gave me a laptop and said, go, and that was the training that I got. So that's neat because I've been able to create this position and focus on things that I'm interested in, but it can also be a little bit daunting when you're fresh out of grad school and you don't have 5 years experience to draw from in another position to decide what you should be doing and how you should be spending your time. I think that another key skill to have is facilitation. I facilitate a lot of meetings, board meetings, committee meetings, and being able to keep people on task and not let them wander off into tangents. I spend all the time that I sit in meetings is spent trying to herd these cats back onto, this is the purpose of the meeting, this is what we need to talk about, not that. It is very difficult to do. So anytime that you're, in a situation where you can kind of guide a group discussion, take advantage of that, because that will be significantly important. In terms of, knowledge of, I have a master's in forestry. I'm a scientist by education, and that's important just to have a base working knowledge of, of the language, what people are talking about when you're sitting in these meetings. Obviously, when I first started, everything was over my head because I didn't understand the context and the nuances of what everyone was talking about, and that just takes time, and I don't think there's anything that you can do to prepare for that. But to have, a basic idea of what is ecological restoration, what does it mean to be in a collaborative group, how does that work, just to have a general understanding of what people are talking about in these meetings is huge. And in terms of facilitating, making sure that everyone's voice is heard is important. There's always someone that likes to talk more than others, so it's important to make sure that everyone gets their opportunity to say what they need. And I guess that's about it, in a nutshell.
Okay. Again, my name is Renee Myers, and I work for the Watershed Restoration Coalition. The Watershed Restoration Coalition is based in the Upper Clark Fork. Our mission basically is to work from Missoula all the way up to the headwaters in Butte. However, since most of the damage is in the Upper Clark Fork, most of what we work on is basically from Garrison Junction up. That's where most of the impacts have been. A little bit away. Okay, sorry. Okay, so our mission statement is to restore water quality, fisheries, and wildlife while protecting the heritage and open space of the Upper Clark Fork River Basin through conservation, restoration, and stewardship practices. We do a lot of different kinds of projects. For you to kind of understand what I do, I think it's really important, for those of you who don't, probably a lot of you do, a little bit about the Upper Clark Fork history. Basically, there's 120 miles of the Clark Fork River that's been impacted by mining and smelting activities. The EPA identified 15 extensive sites that basically comprise the largest Superfund site in the country. So we have a lot of work to do that's going to take a long time to get accomplished. And 20 of the 25 tributaries, basically from the Gold Creek area up, are listed as a TMDL listed streams, and just kind of the numbers of streams there kind of give you an idea of how impacted some of these tributaries are. Okay, for those of you who, sorry, if I use kind of some acronyms that you don't understand, just yell at me, because I can do that a lot. The total maximum daily load is basically how much of a pollutant is allowed to go down the stream per day, and these do not meet, these 20 of 25 streams do not meet those standards and are listed for the following issues. The Upper Clark Fork TMDL included metals, nutrients, and then sediment and morphology. And then we also have other ongoing impacts, like all watersheds do. We have a lot of agricultural impacts. The Upper Clark Fork has large agricultural landowners and also some smaller agricultural landowners. We have historic timber management. We have a lot of historic road issues. We have a lot of sediment issues from those roads that are impacting our stream channels that we're working on. We have additional metals that are basically impacting our sediments in the tributaries due to smelting, the Anaconda smelter. And so basically airborne toxins that settled in sediments in the tributaries not associated with the main stem metals. So not only do we have metals impacts in the main stem, but we also have it in the soils in the tributary areas as well. And then again, irrigation. As we all know, irrigation is a main issue in the Upper Clark Fork. One of the main issues that we do have is flow. So we don't have enough flow in the Upper Clark Fork. So I went about it a little differently. I just figured the best way for me to do this is to kind of give you an example project that I would do and then show you basically how I do it from start to finish, and that's what my job is. I'll just do this. So the project I'm going to talk about today is a habitat flow restoration on Gold Creek at the Thomas Hereford Ranch. Our issues on this ranch, we had 4 main issues. One, there was riparian impacts as a result of out-of-date grazing practices. The riparian area was being continually grazed basically all year round. We had eroding banks, we had bank trampling, there was continual sediment and nutrients going into the stream channel. We had in-stream flow issues from irrigation inefficiencies. This particular landowner had continual flood irrigation and was basically putting 11 to 17 CFS, which is a large amount of water, into a ditch for flood irrigation. There was a lack of riparian wildlife habitat because the riparian habitat was degraded, and we had nutrient sediment issues resulting for stream-side corrals, also known as feedlots, as a more kind of older term. So what do we do? How did we fix it? Number one is we installed along 2 miles of stream, we installed riparian fencing. So we put in riparian pastures, which means that we're going to rest this area for 5 to 10 years, go back in, do a riparian assessment. How well has this riparian area healed? And if it has, do we need to go back and do a short intensity, high intensity, short term grazing, kind of make a grazing management plan with the landowner for this area, or do we not graze it at all? And that will be decided after the rest period. The other one is we replaced 233 acres of flood irrigation to pivot irrigation. So for that 11 to 17 CFS that was going down the ditch, all he needs now is 3.5. So basically we put close to 9 CFS back in the river that normally he would have taken during irrigation season, which, in low flow season during August, September is huge for Gold Creek, which also benefits the main stem of the Clark Fork River because this particular ranch is only a mile from the confluence of the Clark Fork River. Okay. We also were able to remove 25 acres from wildlife, from agricultural production for wildlife habitat. And basically, the feedlot, we were in the process of removing it and relocating it from a stream to the upland area with a buffer, so it will no longer be adding nutrients and sediment to the stream channel. Here's just kind of a picture, just kind of show you. This is kind of an overview. You can see the feedlot area right there, and then even further down it was still impaired from riparian grazing. There's some nice cottonwoods, but a lot of the understory vegetation such as willows and alder and the red osier or dogwood were pretty much hammered. But now it's been fenced for 1.5 years, and already you can see things starting to come up in the riparian area. It's pretty cool. Gold Creek? Mm-hmm. I'm sorry this picture's kind of fuzzy, but I think you can see the left side of what's going on. This was some bank trampling and erosion, basically because we didn't have any large woody debris on the stream channel holding that bank together. So we're having a lot of erosional issues. And this is just kind of how we go about this process. When, this process was a big NRCS project, WRC project. We had about 6 different funders for this project. And when we started putting this project together, what we do is put in some conceptual designs. We do a lot of GIS work to actually identify what needs to be done and where it needs to be done. So I don't have a pointer, but we basically move the feedlot from up there on top all the way over to where these corrals are right there. So it's a good way off of that stream channel. So for my job, how do I make a project successful from start to finish? The number one thing for me is that I needed to learn how to blend. Oh, thank you. Oh, yeah, okay. Conservation and biological values with agricultural values, and that's a really big thing for my job, is I had to take my knowledge and background, which is hydrology and natural resource conservation, and you need to bring it to your constituents. I mean, you have to really blend those two things. How can I make a project that not only meets the needs of the resource, but meets the needs of the landowner and your community that you're working in? So initial project ideas. The first thing I do when we're looking at a project is we need to look at your overall project priorities in the watershed. What's the Department of Fish, Wildlife, and Parks doing? What's the Natural Resource Damage Program doing? What is DEQ doing? Does this fit within the priorities that pretty much everyone's trying to accomplish in your watershed? We look at fisheries populations, native versus non-natives. There's a lot of different factors, overall habitat conditions. And then a cost-benefit analysis. You know, how much bang for the buck are you going to get in this watershed? Are you really going to make an impact, or are you just kind of band-aiding it until something else comes along? Funding is a really, probably one of your most crucial elements, because you can have a great project, but if you can't find someone to fund it, you're out of luck, which is really hard in today's economy to find those grants to fund projects, especially watershed coordinator funding for general operating. But so, you know, and also timelines and implementation. Can you feasibly get this project implemented in the timelines that it needs to be implemented? Do we have enough resources to do it? Do we have enough staff? A lot of smaller nonprofits like us, it's pretty much me. You know, I'm executive director, project manager, grants writer, pretty much everything. And then we have one part-time employee that works for the Clark Fork Coalition and works for us. So because we work on a lot of collaborative projects together. And one of the biggest things is the landowner interested. If you could have great projects, but if you don't have somebody on the ground that's willing to do that project, you know, again, it's not going to happen. Kind of phase 2, we look at contact and coordination. With me, it's really important that I have continual contact and coordination with the landowner. I am always having coffee table time, and I think it's one of the most crucial elements is just sitting down with the landowner and other partners that you're working with. Lots of times I sit down with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and myself and the landowner or DEQ, and we sit around the table and we'll have coffee and we'll talk about the project. You know, is it meeting the resource needs? Is it meeting the landowner needs? And is it, you know, does it fit within the bounds of their operation? Can they still operate and make a living and be able to implement the projects that we have and how it's going to affect them? And that's a really big part of that. And also, one of the main things that I've come across is you have these big collaborative processes, and even projects. Like this was a really huge project. It was very complex. There's a lot of different elements to it. And if you're not very clear with your partners on who is doing which part of it, it gets really confusing. Your timelines kind of get screwed up, and then the project is not as successful as it should be. The other thing I just want to mention really quick is if you don't have a landowner on board, I mostly work with private agricultural landowners, and if that landowner isn't on board and you're just implementing a project and he's kind of like, yeah, that's okay, it's not going to get maintained. If you put a riparian fence in and he's kind of okay with it, but, you know, whatever, he's not going to take the time to maintain it. If he doesn't have respect or appreciation in what you're doing, then, you know, it's not a long-term successful project. It maybe lasts for 5 years and then it's done. So the landowners that you have that are really into the project and respectful usually are your most successful because you do have that long-term maintenance and success. Just again, I was just showing, you know, one of the things we do are conceptual designs for implementation. We secure funding. As a project manager, I'm responsible for securing that funding, making sure the conceptual designs are completed, and determining who's responsible for the maintenance of that project. As I talked about, that's kind of a really big deal. Once you implement a project, who's going to take care of it, who's responsible for it once it leaves your hands, and also the monitoring involved. In order to measure your success as a manager of a project, you need to monitor. You need to figure out what your baseline conditions were before and what they were after in order to determine whether it was a success or not. And just on your project implementation, some of the skills you need to be able to be really organized. That was my biggest hurdle. I was not a very organized person until I got this job. Again, you know, you need to be able to do pre-project monitoring. You have to do implementation, on-the-ground project management. You know, we deal with invoicing, we schedule, we do all the contracting, we have to meet the timelines, and is everybody happy? You know, is the landowner happy? Are you doing good things with the resource? Is an overall successful project? And then we do post-project monitoring. So those are pretty much what's involved in your project implementation, which is really the easiest because all your hard work is done and all the pre-work that you have to do. So skills needed. You know, I think one of the main things you have to do is you have to understand the environment you're working in. If you're working in natural resources, you have to be educated in natural resources. You need to understand all the elements of a river system. How does it work? What are the needs? You know, how do we fix the problems? How do we address the solutions? And you need to have a complete understanding of your constituents, your cultural values of where you're working. You know, I work in the Upper Clark Fork, and it's private agricultural landowners. And to me, That's the link to large intact landscapes, and that is what I do as the ED or project manager, watershed coordinator of these conservation groups. Is that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to save these large intact landscapes. And these agricultural owners are our friends. Without them, you're talking, development, and you won't have those large intact landscapes. And so that's really important. And number 3, I think you really have to have a passion for what you do. I mean, it's not easy working for a nonprofit where most of the time you're wondering where your next paycheck is coming from and all these grants I have to write and what are we doing next year and what are we doing the year after that. And in all that time, you're still trying to concentrate on the project you have on the ground, but you're thinking 2 years ahead. It's very multidimensional, and it's hard. I think it's really hard being a watershed coordinator, and there's a lot of pressure on you to do the things that you need to do. But I think those are the 3 main skills that I have learned, that I have needed. And how did I get them? I grew up on a farm, so for me, I understand the whole agricultural, cultural and values. It was easy for me. I understand what their needs are. I can talk their language. I'm kind of a redneck at heart, so it's really good. And I love natural resources. And to me, to be able to blend those 2 things together was the perfect job for me, and I love it. And I've been working for 16 years on the ground. I started working as a Forest Service technician for the Lolo National Forest, working for their hydrologists and their fisheries biologists, doing hydro and fisheries tech work, which is great because it really gave me my understanding of rivers and small mountain streams and how they function. And so for me to be able to fix them, I need to understand how they function. Trial and error. I mean, we all go into these jobs with these huge expectations, and I think that you kind of just, whether you're a grad student or you have the experience coming into a position like this, you just kind of learn on the fly. There's so many different things and so many different elements to it that you're trying to do all at once, and it gets a little jumbling at times. But the other thing is, the way I learned is observing these large processes and how they work. It's really neat to kind of watch people who have done this for a long time and watch them in this kind of situation. I really learned from people who already had experience. I had the technical experience, but I necessarily didn't have the executive director experience and kind of that big picture conceptual ideas, and that's kind of what I've learned over the last couple of years. And the last thing is really identifying strengths and weaknesses as a person. I think that you bring in a lot of personal values into your professional work, and for me it was, what are my strengths and weaknesses in this job? And how do I fill in the gap for those weaknesses? So for me, I'm a really big conceptual person. I can get great projects started. I meet with landowners, but I like to have somebody on the ground that can actually fulfill those because I have so many other things going on that you get wrapped up in too many things at one time. So I haven't gotten there yet, but I'm working on it. So what's that? That's actually my daughter and my dad. That's my daughter and my dad on our farm. And the last thing, I just think we need to be able to change our perspectives. When I was a younger person in college here, I used to think cows are really bad. What are these cows doing in our stream channel? We need to fix this. And it's not the cows that are the problem, it's how we manage our cattle. And so it's just being able to really, once you start working in the environment, change your perspective and understand the people, understand what you're working with, and be able to adapt with that. And if you can't, then you're really not doing your job well. So with that, I'm all done.
lolowatershed.org.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm probably just talking here.
I might squeal though if I don't turn this off.
Yeah.
I might squeak.
You can squeal. Add on in. I'm Wendy. Good to see you all. I'm really happy that the things I thought about today and the notes I prepared are different from what Megan and Renee said, and I'm sure what Dave will say too. So I think you're getting really good varied perspectives, which is indicative of this kind of work. You've probably started to imagine that you have to be a Jack or Jill of all trades to do this kind of work. Hopefully that's exciting to you. I'm sure it transfers over to a lot of other fields as well. But I think working in watersheds is particularly this way. And since I'm old and getting older, I realized I need to sit here by the microphone and read my notes to make sure I cover what I've said. Usually I'd be up and around the room and have props. As Deb would say, I'd have some fun toys in the room. So to make sure I cover everything in the short amount of time, I'm just going to work through my list here. The Lola Watershed Group's mission is to understand and conserve the unique characteristics of the Lolo Creek watershed, including its wildlife and fisheries, scenic and rural character, local agriculture, and recreational opportunities, all of that, while supporting private property and water rights. And this group, of course, had haggled over their mission statement for a long time. As far as I know, has only changed it once, which is pretty remarkable for a nonprofit group to have had only 2 mission statements in any number of years. The Watershed Group is a 501c3 nonprofit, which I believe the other groups are as well. We're a membership organization, which might be unique to watershed groups. We have actually local people who write out a check at a meeting and say, I want to be a member, I want to put some money behind the group. So I know some groups have been hesitant to ask people for membership, but our group always has and probably always will. It's surprising when you ask people for money what they'll do. You say, could you write me out a check to keep going? And they do. Which is less daunting than writing grants, which I'm sure Megan can say more about. So mostly comprised of local residents and stakeholders of the Lolo Creek watershed. The origins of the group are probably similar to a lot of groups. I think there's kind of maybe 2 main ways that watershed groups start. From the ground up by local residents, or maybe by some agency folks or other nonprofit individuals who say, there's a void here in this particular watershed in this area. There's not a coordinated effort. Let's get something going. In Lolo Creek's case, which, does everyone know where Lolo Creek is? Raise your hand if you've ever been to Lolo Creek or know at least where it is. Okay. It's the very tail end of the Bitterroot, so we're in the same watershed. And we're in Missoula County, but not Ravalli, so there's some political diciness with Lolo Creek being in Missoula County, but kind of far away, being 8 whole miles south from Missoula, a little bedroom community, and then being far enough south from the rest of the Bitterroot that we're kind of seen as a, I don't know, an orphan. We're a little orphan area in Lolo. So the group was started basically with environmental studies alumni John Zelazny, who started an organization called Montana Trout, now known as the Trout Conservancy. And he had some knowledge of fish habitat and what was going on Lolo Creek, got together with local residents and some agency folks and said, we need a watershed group. You can't address concerns on the creek without local involvement. And I think that's definitely been a growing trend in the last 10 years. I would dare to say 20 years ago, nobody knew what a watershed group was. If they did, they were in a pioneering effort. So the focus in the early days, which was 2003, was focusing on declining trout populations and a degraded aquatic habitat. So when that group started writing grants, they had a lot of technical knowledge, a lot of the agency folks in on writing proposals, and got funding from DNRC, Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, and were funded for their first 5 years from the same funder. As criteria changed in that agency, basically the comments were, your group is way too focused on fish. A watershed is not just about fish in the creek. We're talking from the mountains to the creek and all the other critters in it, including people and the houses and all that. So when you start looking at a bigger watershed perspective, to be an effective watershed group or a citizen involved in one, you really need to be looking at a multifaceted approach. So as I've been involved in the group since 2007, the last 3 years, the shift has really gone to include water quantity, water quality, and weed management, and also some wildlife habitat issues. So you're looking for a broad range of background and expertise from all the people involved, whether it's local citizens or your staff, which is a pretty tall order. And I think people come into this kind of work from different angles. You see that Megan and Renee maybe had different skills coming in. You might have more experience or less, maybe some good organizational and people skills or technical skills, but in the end, you got to pull all these things together to get a bigger picture view of what to do in a watershed. The main issues on Lolo Creek, maybe less complicated than some other watershed groups, thankfully for me. Sedimentation from the highway, when Highway 12 was put in, it basically channelized a very narrow canyon, and you're basically cutting a creek in half and cutting out all the meanders. So when you look at a creek losing the area that it usually needs to roam and cutting that in half, you're going to see increased flow of water when there is water, and increased erosion. So putting in a highway is a pretty simple act. Instead of wagons running down the Lewis and Clark trail there, you put in a highway and you completely change the geomorphology of the area. And that was in the 1950s. So we're talking kind of recent history here. And then the other thing is sedimentation from the highway itself, sanding and salting a highway, and what that contributes, the loss of habitat along the creek from development, and also logging roads. Plum Creek is one of the largest landowners in the country, and in Upper Lolo Creek, they owned basically the entire headwaters. And as far as I can tell from the reports I've read, Lolo Creek has one of the highest densities of logging roads anywhere in Montana, and I'm trying to fact check on that because it might be in a pretty broad geographic area. But all those logging roads add up to a whole lot of dirt running down the mountains into the water, which affects the fish. So those are the main issues. I came into this group with a background in nonprofit management, basically working at a nature center, the Montana Natural History Center, where I did watershed education. So I had a pretty good background in what is a watershed, how does it work, how do the parts fit together. But my experience primarily was in the nonprofit management, managing the board of directors and volunteers, organizational skills, networking, understanding where funding comes from. So I kind of had the bigger picture of how does this all work organizationally, but my weaknesses really were in the technical aspects of aquatic habitat and what's happening in the creek and what does sediment mean and that kind of thing. So my natural resource background was pretty minimal. Most of my emphasis was in communications and publicity and education. So I would just say if this is the kind of work that interests you, even if it's a different kind of issue, that it almost doesn't matter which way you come into nonprofit advocacy, is that whatever your background, you're going to have strengths that you can contribute. And the key really would be, as I think Renee mentioned, is understanding what your strengths and weaknesses might be when you come in, because you can hustle and figure out and gather people around you to fill in the spots that you don't know. If you're right out of school and you're winging it, energy will take you a long way. Idealism will take you a long way. Just sheer passion and will. You can, and denial, yes, a certain amount of denial. Ignorance, naivete, all those things are good at the beginning, and you dive in, and then along the way you acquire some skills, and then you maybe benefit from having too much to do, so you learn to prioritize a bit, and then you say, heck, I can't do all this. You're asking me to do too much for too little. Why would I do that? Well, if you make the decision that you want to do that, then you keep diving in and you ask for help. And I'll make some comments at the end about my suggestions about how to do that. But you can see it's pretty multifaceted. The Lolo Watershed Group in the past has conducted a lot of tours, getting people out on the ground, landowners and residents and agency folks, to say, what does our stream look like? How can we fix it? And pulling in some of the agency people to say, geez, what do we need to do here? They've done some good assessments, which I have yet to figure out what to do with. Really good scientific documents. Again, my background is not really in technical issues, figuring out what these documents mean. You need to pull in some scientists folks and people who understand data to say, what do we do next? Where can we make an impact? They did some workshops on restoration, Earth Day fairs, painted the storm drains in Lolo. They stenciled that Dump No Waste stencil to help educate the public. So there's been kind of a haphazard approach to say, let's teach people something, anything. And they had that consistent funding for the first 5 years, but that was pretty limited. So I would say in the beginning it was just a group of citizens saying, let's do something neat, let's do something fun, let's make a difference, but maybe not a lot of coordination. So as I've gotten my feet under me about this group, saying where can we really make an impact and what should we do next, I've focused a lot on education. And I'm a hands-on person. I like to visualize the thing I'm talking about, so we got a grant from DEQ, a mini grant, to develop maps of our watershed. So anytime we sit at a meeting, we can pull out the big map and look at which creek, which bridge. If you've ever sat around with some local agricultural people, they can always say, you know, that bridge there and that ditch there, and you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, even though I live here. You need to look at it and agree on what it is you're talking about. So especially when you're working with a board of directors who might be new citizens coming in and not very knowledgeable, you need to all have a common point of reference. So developing the maps of our own watershed and whose water rights, and then also I developed our first website, which is the only one the group has had. So that's been a big help in pointing people toward that, things that we need to work on. We've diversified funding a little bit. Our funding now comes from the state Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, which is considered Lolo Creek pretty high on its list of impaired streams from the things I mentioned before, sediment and channelization from the highway, and the road densities. So it's pretty severely impacted. The other projects we worked on are drought management and monitoring the flow in partnership with the Montana Water Trust, which is now part of the Clark Fork Coalition. Getting my board out there in the stream and their waders, socializing, bonding, that kind of stuff really helps pull a board together, and measuring how much water is in the stream so we can deal with that. Partnerships have been really important since I've been involved. I can't do it all. I have a very part-time schedule. There's not much funding now, so I've really been focusing on working with partner groups who have skills, copy machines, printing facilities, mailing lists, that kind of thing, and saying, let's team up, let's have a meeting together, let's talk about things of mutual concern and share our resources. So Clark Fork Coalition, Montana Water Trust, the Lolo Community Council, being more local, Office of Planning Grants in Missoula, the Rural Initiatives group is really a great resource for anything rural. The County Weed District and the Water Quality District. So I rely on those people who are full-time paid staff to teach me things, to help give me inspiration, to point me toward priorities, because nobody can really grasp all of this. And the funding right now for our group, basically what we're focusing on is to write a draft restoration plan. And I'm trying to minimize everything else. We haven't had meetings in a while. We haven't had a board meeting or a public meeting. Recently, we're saying we're focusing the two contractors we have, myself and our board president, on gathering with our advisory board people and writing this document to say, how do we go forward from here? If we could dream up a way to do something to Lolo Creek that would improve habitat, fish, aquatic, and critters on the land, what would we do first? How much would it cost? What order should we do it in? Focusing on things that highlight the group enough to build visibility, add people to the board of directors, get members and volunteers, basically strategizing on all that. And that will be through next June. So if anybody wants to volunteer, we could always use help with that. So that's basically an overview of the group. Future challenges would be to evolve from a small group of stakeholders into a more broad-based membership group with diverse people involved. Money, put dollar signs and keep hitting dollar signs, dollar signs, dollar signs. Money is probably the biggest challenge. There's never a limit to the inspiration and ideas people have, but the funding is how you define it and set your time frame and say, what can we do now, and how much can we accomplish with this money. Leadership is always a challenge, how to sustain the energy of a group and shift away from individuals with certain interests to a group that has a lot more experience with planning, strategic planning. Going with the threats and opportunities that they create. In Lolo, that's really been, amazingly enough, the biggest boost to your membership always is some huge threat that comes along. We've had our share of them. Recently, the Bitterroot Resort, those big ski lift, ski runs that you see gouged in the hillside there under Lolo Peak. Paying attention to those issues, watching residential development and being involved in zoning and planning, and also the big rigs. You've heard about the industrial huge trucks from the tar sands proposed to come through Lolo Creek and the Bitterroot. Going to meetings, staying informed. It really takes reading the paper, staying on email lists and getting people to write letters and that sort of thing to keep some of those threats at bay. And an exciting opportunity for Lolo Creek has been the Montana Legacy Project. You're probably aware of that, but the Trust for Public Land and the Nature Conservancy acquired the whole upper headwaters of Lolo Creek, which was all Plum Creek land and is now being transferred to Lolo National Forest. So now, even though it's a bummer, we've inherited all this logged and weed-infested land, at least it is our land, our public land, that we can get out there and restore. So finding funding to restore what's been damaged is pretty exciting. And then Megan and Renee have talked a little bit about skills and duties needed, but I kind of made this quick tick list of things, and I think because of their different strengths, they touched on some, and I'm just going to reiterate real quick in case there's others that you might be pondering of, geez, how multi-talented do I need to be to do this kind of work? So you can pick and choose off this list of things you might end up being good at or good at now. Duties and skills of a watershed coordinator: advocate for the mission of the organization, have a passion for your cause, be a point of contact for members, stakeholders, public, and the media, conduct public meetings, conduct board meetings, organize and host events and tours, coordinate membership and volunteer events, and manage them, develop and maintain partnerships and collaborate, do outreach, publicity, media, promotion, maintain websites, publications, and produce newsletters, displays, and presentations. Educate all age groups, the public, and targeted audiences. Raise money and solicit in-kind donations. Manage projects and participate in strategic planning and visioning and setting goals. So how do you do that? You need a lot of different skills. Public speaking. Well, I was going to end with that. You have to be able to walk on water. Good point. How do you walk on water? Well, what kind of skills do you need to be able to do all of those things for everyone and gracefully? You need good public speaking skills for small and large groups and media interviews, good writing skills. As Megan mentioned, you might need to submit public comments, turn in proposals, reports, press releases, fact sheets. And depending on your funding, that might be monthly, quarterly, annual, big final reports. I spend a lot of time writing reports. I spend less time raising the money. I spend a lot more time, probably 5 times more time, telling people why they didn't give me enough money and why I couldn't accomplish enough because it's not enough money to do it. But you still have to write the report. So if you can figure out how to sum it all up at the end and then go on to the next thing, you would be walking on water, for sure. So speaking and writing, self-management, learn to be organized, resourceful, be efficient with limited resources, be able to prioritize, avoid duplication. Don't do something someone else is doing. Do something different. Do something unique. Do something special. Manage other people. You're in human resources now. You didn't know that. Manage members, manage board members, manage volunteers, manage partners, manage committees, provide leadership, inspiration, facilitation, direction, and provide orientation and training, supervision, and evaluate those people too, and be evaluated yourself. Manage the office, files, keep current documents handy, know your bylaws, send emails and follow-up, do data management for membership, money, and technical data, financial, I know, you're going, oh my God, right? Yes, financial accounting, budgeting and reporting, fundraising, solicit money, in-kind donations from individuals, organizations, and businesses, communicate with landowners, stakeholders, members, board members, advisory board, agencies, and volunteers.
And you do all that in one day.
And your adversaries, don't forget, everyone is not in your camp. There are people you are working maybe against or in spite of or to do something different from. You've got to communicate with them as well and understand where they're coming from and what they're doing and why. And then you have to keep track of all that, conceive of the idea, develop it, implement it, report it, monitor it, evaluate, and assess it. And then, oh yeah, technical knowledge. That would be really good if you knew about the ecology of watersheds, aquifers, groundwater, septic, sewer, riparian health, natural resources, wildlife and habitat, weeds, agriculture, pollution, water monitoring, and restoration. You could pick and choose a piece of any of that. You could do an amazing job because what we really need is a team of a whole bunch of people in a community, a village of people that offer up all those skills and get it done. No one person does all that. This is tongue in cheek. That might say all that in our job descriptions, and we laugh at those, right? We try, but we can't do all that. So it's also helpful if you have local knowledge and connections about your neighborhood, about the place that you live in. If you understand something about education and curriculum and how to target audiences with your programs and your publicity. Could be a lawyer too. You could know legal issues, liability insurance, or at least get someone on board who knows about those things. Tax and personnel issues, and the evolution of nonprofit organizations, because at any given moment, an organization is just where it is, and what do you do as a leader to bring it forward? That's hard to tell. You have to trust your intuition and maybe get some help to figure that out. But that's where longevity in a group can help you pinpoint, what's the thing I should do today now? Should I write a grant? Should I pick up the phone? Should I read a document? And that's a constant challenge, is figuring out what to do next. So acquiring skills, I think the best way is learning by doing. You can do this right out of school. You dive in and learn on the job. The best training I had, I think, actually was door-to-door fundraising. I came here for a summer job and knocked on doors every day all around Montana. And just learning to talk to people, read their body language, know what they're interested in, ask them questions and listen. Yeah. Yeah, door slamming in your face. Yeah, learning how to hear no and go on in spite of that. I think that even though the world is technological, and one of you mentioned that's really a world of email and written communications, that nothing really replaces that face-to-face ability to connect with people and get them inspired. Let's see, and teaching. I think learning by teaching is also very effective. You really reinforce things by teaching them, talking to your neighbors, talking to your family, telling your kids things, helps you figure out what's important to you. So if you can teach something somehow, somewhere, that will really reinforce things that you need to learn. My final recommendations for doing this kind of work would be, don't try to do everything yourself. Know your strengths and weaknesses, delegate, set limits, keep track of your hours. Try to get paid what you think you're worth. And that goes for any job. Don't be a martyr unless you choose to be one. You don't have to save the whole world. You can just save one little small piece of it. Reach out to others, find a mentor, and develop partnerships. Call people up for ideas, get their advice and inspiration when you get stuck. Remember to celebrate the successes, and then with everyone who's involved, and sustain yourself. This is a lecture series on sustainability. You have to sustain yourself to do this kind of work. I would say eat well, do yoga, go hiking. If you're frustrated, take your dog out. Maintain your friendships and family connections, and basically just go for the long haul. And I had a poem to share, but if I'm running over on time, I could maybe just read it at the end, or know where we're at. It could be a closing thing. Yeah. Yeah. You could do it at the end. Yeah.
brwaterforum.org. My name is Dave Schultz. I'm chair of the board of directors of the Bitterroot Water Forum. I'll tell you a little bit about the organization, why it came into existence, and some of the challenges it's faced, and what we're looking at for the near future here. It was established in 1993, and as the name might imply, it was a group of people that got together to talk about water issues, so thus the Water Forum. And I think that was the focus of work for a good 5 or 6 or 7 years. People just got together and started talking about water, and it was really an important thing to do. It gradually worked into a working organization, and in 2004 it became a 501c3 corporation, and was eligible then to do a lot more of the business kinds of things of a watershed organization. Our mission is to help people restore, preserve, and enhance healthy waters for all the users in our growing valley through education and through restoration projects. And growing valley is kind of an important phrase there, because as many of you know, Ravalli County and the Bitterroot is either the top or the second fastest growing region in Montana for the last 15 years or so, about the time, the age of the water forum. So growth is is probably our most immediate short-term and long-term challenge, or the consequences of that. Let's see, we're funded through grants and through donations, and as you've heard from the other watershed organizations, and pretty typically that's our challenge. Most of us have come to the board or as volunteers because we want to do projects. And sure, as you come out of school, you want to do projects and do some things, but you soon find out in order to do projects, you have to do a lot of other things too, first. And one of them is fundraising, and most of us have never had much experience or training in fundraising, so it's a great learning experience. And again, if you want to get something done, you've got to learn how to do the business end of a nonprofit, the business end of a watershed organization. As I said, our two main focus areas are education and restoration projects. So that's what we spend our time doing our work with. We do a pretty classic approach to restoration in the Bitterroot. First of all, we really work with a lot of partners up there, a lot of organizations in the Bitterroot, and a lot of them are our partners. We do a classic kind of an assessment of the waters, and the main stem of the Bitterroot and the East Fork and the West Fork are our main water besides Lake Como, but our main focus area is the headwaters. And so we've received grants and done assessments of TMDLs, total maximum daily limits of nutrients and sedimentation and temperature and all the other things that are important to healthy waters. And then we identify projects, the higher priority projects that need restoration, and if you put the buck, where do you get the biggest bang? And as the other partners on the panel here have indicated, the most important piece of work that we do is working with people, working with partners, working with landowners, working with potential funders. That, again, is kind of a surprise. When I came out of school a few years ago, it was full of all kinds of technical wizardry, but I've soon found out that that's just a starting point. I mean, that's the kind of background you need to start on your career, and you're never going to be doing what you think what you thought you were going to be doing. But it was necessary in order to have the background. If you're working in environmental studies or watershed restoration, that kind of background is, as some of these folks have said, give you the language and give you the understanding and giving the working knowledge. But the real work is working with people and working and organizing yourself to, with others, find common interests and put together a project or educate people on issues that they see are important to them, not are important to you. So understanding all of that and starting from the beginning point of your technical training. How many of you have been in the Bitterroot, spent time up there? It's a pretty good sized watershed, 2,900 square miles, and it goes from Sapphire Ridgetop to the Bitterroot Mountain Ridgetop, from Chief Joseph Pass down into Missoula. So it's a pretty compact area. We like to say that it's a pretty small neighborhood. When we look at how do we get information out throughout the county, we realize it's a small neighborhood. We have a very good board, 8 people, and there are 3 or 4 of those folks that know, I'll bet you they know 80% of the people in the valley personally, because of their regular day-to-day work. And that is essential, and it also kind of takes the pressure off of our watershed coordinator or executive director. That person, you folks have talked about teamwork with your board and with your partners. That's exactly the only way we get anything done in the Bitterroot, is working through our board members who know people and can put us in touch and understand the the issues and the interests at each one of the watersheds in the Bitterroot. There are 24 different irrigation companies in the Bitterroot, and that's a pretty complex set of variables to deal with. Two of them are really large, Bitterroot Irrigation District and Daly Ditches, but there are 22 other smaller ditches, and each one has from 5 to 100 members on it. And again, because of the growth, when you come into a valley and you used to have 20 users on an irrigation ditch and you put a couple of subdivisions in, and pretty soon you got 100. And everybody expects that water running through their property is theirs, and they may not have right to any of it. So it's again, a need for a forum to discuss water issues. And getting back to our public education, our main challenges, our short-term challenges, is just that. Having people that move there understand the value and the uses and the threats to the water resources in the Bitterroot. They move into the valley and they see this lush, beautiful green expanse across the valley, and they think, well, this is really, water is abundant and clean and will always be that way. And there's more than a grain of truth to that. There is a lot of water resources, but they don't realize that when Lewis and Clark came through here, it was a desert. They talked about the sagebrush, and it's all man-made lushness. And it's hard to get people to understand that, and then to appreciate the threats that they don't see. Appreciate that there are threats that are important to address now. Water nutrient and temperature and so forth, because where they came from, it may be, this, by comparison, this is paradise. The Bitterroot Valley is their piece of heaven. And so again, that's part of our challenge, is to find appropriate and wise ways of introducing people to the value and the conditions around our water resources. The project challenges are more of really trying to find our partners and trying to find funding to achieve them. You've heard a lot about some of the same challenges we have here today. Our education is, we've accomplished most of that through public involvement, public presentations around some of the characteristics of our water. Hot Springs presentation had probably the most interest of the general public. But when you get into more of a technical presentation, such as the status of the West Slope cutthroat trout or the bull trout habitat and some of the nutrient loading, we're usually talking to people who are our nerd friends, the TU folks, the Trout Unlimited folks, the fly fishing community, and a few of the floaters. But the general public, again, is, all they want to do is see green and wet, and are happy with that. So it's quite a challenge. We've also had a really good success trying to reach out to the realty and development community. We've put together a training class for realtors and developers, having them understand we take them right out of the field, and what is a riparian area. And when you have a lot, what's the value of that? What's the economic value of having an intact riparian area to that piece of property that you're selling? And what would be the value of moving your proposed residence off a little bit so that the riparian stays intact and functioning? And what's the economic value and what's the enjoyment value of that? And it's a matter of providing a different frame of reference to people, as opposed to having them build so their deck is extending out over the river or the stream so that they can hear the water. So that's an ongoing education opportunity, and it's been pretty successful. We also offer free consultation on site to realtors and builders. If someone is looking at building a home or another building on their existing property, we'll come out and talk to them about how the riparian on their property is functioning and what the value of that is to wildlife, to runoff to flood possibilities, and it's a free service and completely confidential. If we see something that is a little bit haywire, we don't go telling tales to anyone. And we've had a couple of on-the-ground consultations. It's been really positive. Projects that we have currently is a couple. Most of it's related to sediment reduction because of the assessments that we've done that have identified problem areas. We have a couple of resource advisory committee, Forest Service grants to address sedimentation problems in the Bitterroot, and also with the Department of Environmental Quality, non-point source pollution projects that are pretty good-sized projects, and getting landowners involved and finding matching private funds is a challenge, but we're working toward basically picking off all the identified problem areas that we've found in our assessments. Again, our partners are very important. The Bitterroot has probably more organizations. I'm also working on another nonprofit effort up there to increase overall nonprofit capacity and also outside regional funding into the Bitterroot for nonprofits. And there are over 400 nonprofit organizations in the Bitterroot Valley. I was astounded. And 250 of them are active. That's still a lot for 40,000 people or 45,000 people. I mean, every time you want to do something, you start another organization, it seems like. But it sounds like Missoula. But that's a source of, it's a bit of a difficulty in trying to coordinate, but it's also a source of our strength. There's a lot of diversity of ideas and interests. I'll skip through some of this stuff here and skip right to the challenges. Again, the short-term challenge is awareness of people, to understand what they have and how close to a tipping point we are on some of our nutrient loading. I mean, you can talk to a few fisher people out there, and they can tell you the rocks in some of the areas are getting a little slippery from nutrient loading and algae on rocks. But for most of the general public, they don't get out into the water, so they're not aware of the tipping point that's coming close. So that's our short-term challenge, is to really have people understand that it isn't all green and lush and pure. The long-term challenge, I think, is the long-term nutrient loading of 20,000 septic systems in the Bitterroot, and eventually where that's going to end up. And again, that's our long-term challenge, and how do we address that in a way that is economically viable and also gets public support for it. So skills as Vicki mentioned, we lost our executive director to a better job, one that pays for every hour she works. She thinks. She hopes. And benefits. So our past ED was with us for 4 years, 3.5 to 4 years, and every executive director we had has brought the organization farther to a new plateau. And so we're eager to take this chance to kind of look at, all right, what kind of skills do we really want in an individual for our next phase? We're taking an opportunity to do that. And as these people have said, the skills we're looking for are less technical, although that is important to have a working knowledge of some natural resource or agriculture. The skills we need are for collaboration, for listening, for accepting and respecting people for who they are and where they are on their path, and ability to frame issues, frame possibilities, and pull people together to facilitate projects and ideas and initiatives that really work toward satisfying as many common interests as we can of all the stakeholders. That's the kind of skills. Now, you probably didn't all get that here, did you? Did you take Collaboration 101? You probably had some of that, but public involvement, I know you have a little bit of that. But I guess the point is that you're not going to have all the skills you're going to need. And with our board, we really look at it as a team effort. that my background is in engineering technically, but also in public involvement and public engagement. And so we all pitch in and work together. Right now, we're doing all of it because we have a volunteer who's helping us out with some of the office functions. But we have 6 active, pretty good-sized projects that we, Board of Directors, need to keep stewarding on through Department of Environmental Quality and the Forest Service and so forth. So it's a big job. But we're up to the challenge, and we're looking for somebody that has more of that public involvement and people skills and organization skills. We can find the technical information, as a couple of you have identified, but we need to pull it together, organize it, and make a good, strong case. The characteristics we're looking for is passion and ability and willingness to learn and take care of themselves, so that, burnout is the number one problem with people like us that want to work in natural resources. So that's it, and I'd be glad to answer any questions, and thank you, Vicki.
Do that. So poetry is one way I celebrate. This is from a handout from the Montana Nonprofit Network Training, which there's a Montana Nonprofit Association, and I recommend their materials, and I also recommend the Institute for Conservation Leadership if you're interested in conservation nonprofits. They have excellent resources. But I like that the front page of their handout at a training was a poem. This is called To Be of Use, and it's by Marge Piercy. Marge Piercy. To be of use. The people I love the best jump into work head first, without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, that black sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who stand in the line and haul in their places, who are not parlor generals or field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands and crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing, well done, has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn, are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real.
Hopefully that inspires all of you to want to take on the incredibly challenging task that this panel has been describing. I was going to ask, how many of you want to be watershed coordinators now? I was afraid they may have scared people off. It is a very challenging job, and we are going to take some questions. I want to say a few things before we start questions. I want to point out that these presentations are all being filmed by MCAT, and so I assume you can go on MCAT's website and see a schedule as to when these will, so that you can watch them at other times, or you can tell your friends about them and they can watch them at other times. You can also get each one of them on a DVD from MCAT as well, right? So they're all available on DVD should you want to have a copy to show. I wanted to introduce a couple of other people, although one just walked out. Next week we will have a whole panel of sustainability coordinators, and Sherry Peacock was here, the university's sustainability coordinator, but she just left. But next week, we'll have a whole panel of sustainability coordinators. I want to point out a couple of people. Deb Fosnock from the Watershed Education Network over there by Allison told us a little bit about the Watershed Education Network earlier. So a local environmental education group that takes kids out to study streams and also that trains adults to do stream monitoring in the area. And Gerald Mueller right there in the white sweater, who facilitates several other such groups, including the Upper Clark Fork Steering Committee, and then a very big group, the Clark Fork Task Force. Isn't that what it's called, the Clark Fork Task Force? Where they really look at the whole basin and about water availability in the whole basin. He's given some, he gave some really interesting talks earlier this year on, well, just they've really tried to look at the long term and the potential for communities running out of water, and how do we go about doing some planning and conservation, and then just thinking about some sources of water for the long term. So, and that was one of my questions, actually, that sort of long-term question. I was going to ask you guys how often your groups meet. And then I realized there are probably a lot of different kinds of meetings that you have. Some of them are like retreats for the board where they take a long-term view of things, and then others are meetings to deal with very short-term problems. So I will go ahead and ask that question, how often do your groups meet, and how much of their time do they spend talking about fighting the current grass fires versus thinking about those big long-term questions. What's going to happen to this resource in the long term? What are the big problems coming up in the future that we need to be taking action on now to prevent those problems as much as possible? We'll just go down the row again.
Well, we have a monthly board meeting where we go over all the business, financial stuff, staff report, committee reports, et cetera. Once a year, the board meets to do strategic planning. It doesn't end up being as strategic as I would like it to be. We also have a monthly public meeting for people in the community where we'll have a program about different natural resource issues, weeds, fire, et cetera, just to try and keep the community engaged and get our name out and that sort of thing. We also have monthly committee meetings. I think we have 4 committees that are separate from the other meetings that we have, and then on top of that, I'm involved in a bunch of other meetings that I don't say should happen. I just go. So I spend a lot of time in meetings. I would say that we spend most of our time kind of dealing with what's in front of us right now. We may think about, 2 years out, but that's probably the farthest that we get with any sort of detail. I mean, obviously there's a vision of what we'd like to see in the watershed, but it's kind of all we can do to stay on top of what we have right in front of our faces. So unfortunately, we don't spend as much time looking out further.
We have monthly watershed group meetings for the Upper Clark Fork. We're basically, like Megan was saying, we meet with all of our partners, and hopefully most of our board members are attending. Pretty much almost all of our board members are private agricultural landowners. So it just depends on what time of year it is. If it's haying season, well, you don't get too many there. If it's calving season. And then we usually have a board meeting every couple months, just due to people's time schedules. We are in the process, we have funding to write a 5-year strategic plan for our organization. So we are in the process right now of organizing a fairly big board retreat and really trying to prioritize what our big picture projects look like over the next 5 years. Like Megan said, a lot of our meetings, we're looking at projects that we're currently working on, but in addition to that, we're really looking at the big picture in the Upper Clark Fork. The Upper Clark Fork is a little bit different than a lot of other watersheds because of the Superfund site. The Upper Clark Fork was under litigation for a really long time. And so basically, we couldn't get a whole lot of restoration and conservation work accomplished up there because of this litigation. So it's really been just in the last probably 2 years that we've really been able to get on the ground and start doing things. And one of the things that the WRC is trying to coordinate is a watershed restoration plan. We have a completed TMDL, and we are currently working with all our partners with money from DEQ to write a collaborative watershed restoration plan, which will basically prioritize what issues we want to work on and how we're going to go about getting them done. And it's going to give us a 3 to 5 year work plan so that, you know, in the Upper Clark Fork, up until now, one group's working here, one group's working there, and one group's working over there, and we're trying to communicate, but it's really not kind of a strategic process of identifying, well, where do we really need to work? And what niche do you fill and what niche do I fill? And how can we work together not only for funding, but technical support, coordination, all of those kind of overarching issues, and you know, how are we going to get things done on the ground? So it's been really good. We have a lot of the agencies involved, other nonprofits that are working up there, mainly the Clark Fork Coalition and actually National TU. So we are looking at big picture. It's just going to take a little time, but we hope to have our watershed restoration plan actually completed by the end of December, beginning of January.
Oh, she's got, oh,
You got one?
Our board of directors has 5 members, and in our bylaws, it basically says we would meet every other month, so bi-monthly, 6 meetings a year, and most of the folks on the board are local landowners, and they're pretty busy in the summer with sheep and weeds and that kind of thing, so we tend not to meet much in the summer, and then use the fall, winter, spring to have more meetings. Then we alternate that with public meetings because it's just as important to draw new people in as it is to work with the people already involved. So we have focused on trying to have some good presentations and panel discussions and outreach events to bring people in. At this point, the Lola Watershed Group is shifting a bit away from having meetings because you get to where you talk a lot and never get through half your agenda, and ultimately the contractors or staff need to get done the work that they're contracted to do. So my leadership style now is to say, let's focus on what we need to get done, which is write our draft restoration plan. So I'm using the resources of our advisory board and any members that we have to focus on that rather than do public outreach. You can't do both very well with limited money. So again, it comes back to prioritizing. Better do the grant that's in front of you now or you won't get other ones. So for our group, it's to take from now through June to assess what data's out there, figure out what the gaps are, and then make a timeline of if we were to restore our creek, how would we do it? What would we do first, second, and third? Identify the costs, and then once that document, which is this project is funded by DEQ, once that's approved by the state, then you kind of have their stamp on it saying, we like how you're going about this. You've done all your necessary involvement with your partners, and you have a grasp of the data and the challenges, then that document really helps you submit to other foundations and agencies to say, we know what we're doing now. We're not just having a haphazard approach. And once you have that, I think you can be eligible for bigger grants and have much more complex project and funding going on. So we're right at that transition of getting away from kind of local organization to really focusing on how do you restore a creek. And meetings, I want to say meetings. I mean, a lot gets done in meetings when they're well organized, but again, it comes down to how much time do you have, and you always have to make that tough decision as a coordinator of what should I do right now. So that's a challenge.
Our board meets monthly for 2 hours, and we really focus on trying to get our business done in that 2 hours. There are a lot of other meetings outside that monthly board meeting. In fact, every day we're meeting with partners and collaborators and landowners. I think probably we're focused on what's in front of us too for the next year. You got to realize that, and then most projects take a couple of years to develop, and that's fast. I mean, they take longer. because of the working with landowners and finding partners and, going back and forth, several iterations. And so that's what our meetings are mostly focused. When I say right in front of us, it's the next couple of years. We've got a couple, 3 projects that we know are in our mission and that we've got assessments and some support for, but it takes that long to have the conversations. So that's what we spend our time on doing. And quite frankly, you can't get grants for that, can you? For collaborating and making sure that all the interests are identified and you're working towards satisfying them.
So we got questions? Open up. Okay.
Can I hog it with 3 questions or not?
They're short questions.
The first one for the panel is, besides grants, what's your other sources of funding? Secondly, what would be the impact if your organization went away? And third, have you explored internet funding opportunities?
We are funded 99% through grants. Some of them are government, some of them are private. And we get some contributions from people in the community, but that's not a regular source, and you can't count on how much you'll get. Sometimes it's 500, sometimes it's 10,000, you don't know. What was if we went away. I think being still a fairly young organization, we're building a lot of momentum, and so we've gotten a lot of things started that if we went away, that wouldn't get done. And I think that, we've also been able to be a bridge between the government agencies, primarily the Forest Service, because they own most of the public land in the valley, with the community. And so that's been something that has been really huge in, preventing appeals and litigation on projects. And I think that if we were to go away, that might revert, not because the Forest Service would necessarily do anything different, but just we've been able to put what the Forest Service says they're going to do into English, and simplify it in a way that shows the benefits of it. Not this is what we're going to do in this year, but this is the benefit that it'll have. And I think when people understand that, they're more open to it. And then what was your third question?
What is internet? Is that becoming kind of a growing avenue for raising funds for nonprofits?
I think it costs money to do that. Pretty sure it does. Everything that I've looked at, you have to pay, to get the service to do the online donations. And so, I agree. I think that, it's something that can work, but we, being a very small and, pretty focused area, we're talking 250,000 acres, the people that are in our valley aren't spending as much time on the computer, and so we don't really feel like it's you have to prioritize what you're going to do. And in a perfect world, if we, I guess if we had all the money, we wouldn't need to ask for more, but.
Well, actually, the intent of as I've understood, the intent of internet funding is not your local people, but to broaden out to people around the country, around the world. So if you make a really good case for what you're doing, they might be inclined to send you money.
Perhaps. I don't have time to deal with that.
Let's see.
I mean, do the 2 funding questions together, and then what happens if you go away?
Okay. We're based 99.9% off grant funds, whether it's foundation grants, most of them are state and federal grants. We have not looked into internet funding as well. Just, Megan was saying, it's like you only have so much time to do the things that you have to do, and we spend a lot of time writing grants, so that pretty much goes to the bottom of the list. And as far as what would happen if we went away. We're a little bit different of a watershed group. We don't do as much outreach and education as we do projects on the ground because we are a landowner-based group, and that's kind of their priority, is to get good projects done. And, you know, there's a couple other groups working in the Upper Clark Fork, the Clark Fork Coalition being one of them, but they're more of the education and outreach kind of overarching larger organization, and we have the real contact with the landowners because our board is made up of landowners, and we've kind of ingrained ourselves in the community that when landowners need help on a project, they come to us. So I think that if we were to go away, that link is gone, and there would be a really big gap there.
Lilla Watershed Group has, since 2003, only had between $5,000 and $10,000 of funding each year, which is precious little. It's all been state grants. And then kind of a regular source of membership funding, which is a few $100s a year, pays for paper and ink cartridges and stamps and that sort of thing. Nothing on the internet. I think that your best case is made to local people. So I know everything I've learned about fundraising is to get away from grant funding, which is not dependable, and to go more for individual donors. So the idea of working local and working with landowners who have some money is key. So again, developing those relationships and asking people directly, hand us your money now so we can fix things. If we went away, I'm a firm believer in education, so first thought was we would have a less educated citizenry. And then our group directly has supported individual landowners in help with weed mitigation and fencing and that sort of thing. So hooking local people up with state resources that they might not know about. So a lot of our work is indirect in getting money to individuals. It doesn't come through our group, but helps people fund things on their own property. So just helping landowners. I also believe if our group went away, there'd probably be more dense development on Highway 12. It's unzoned now and will be zoned this coming year. So if we disappeared, we couldn't have any say on that. I believe there'd be less water in the creek, more diverted. I'd like to believe if we went away, there'd be more erosion. So we don't want that to happen. I think there'd be a less healthy riparian habitat. And again, back to people, what actually happens in people's backyards when they live along a creek is of critical importance, and what happens in the forests up above people's houses is important. So we need to have people learn those things. So I think watershed groups are essential to educating people.
Well, our funding has been probably 99% grants as well, and that's been one of our recognitions that we need to change all that. We're moving into looking at maintaining 4 or 5 streams of funding, grants being one of them. If we went away, I think the role we play here is played by no other organization in the valley, other than the Lolo folks. But there, you know, Ravalli County is very polarized politically. The ranchers don't talk to the developers unless they need to sell something. The Water Forum plays a role in bringing those disparate groups together to solve a problem that they both recognize from their own perspectives. And I think if we went away, that would be a loss for a while. And I think the void would be filled pretty quickly by somebody else saying, you know what, we need to have some way of getting folks together here. And so that's my answer. And the internet stuff, let's talk.
And let's thank our panel.